Welcome to Lesson 7 of MySci Unit 15, Observing Weather Patterns. In Lesson 7, students will answer the question, how is weather different where I live? Students will make comparisons between short-term and long-term weather forecasting. They figure out that climate represents long-term patterns of weather data for a specific location on Earth. They also figure out that climates around the world can vary. In the engaged portion of this lesson, students will consider what the weather is like around the world. Next, students will read the book On the Same Day in March, A Tour of the World's Weather by Marilyn Singer. Refer to the Read Aloud Guide for this book, which can be found in the teacher pages of this lesson. Google Earth, and timeanddate.com are all resources you can use to explore weather at different locations on Earth. In the Explore portion of this lesson, students will revisit the weather data that they have been collecting, recall how this data can be used to predict short-term weather, and consider if this data can be used to predict long-term weather patterns. Students will participate in a discussion. There are a number of questions provided in the curriculum to guide you in facilitating this class discussion. The goal of these questions is to get students thinking about how you would predict long-term weather in our region, as well as other locations of Earth. In the Explain portion of this lesson, students will revisit their learning about forecasts and how they are developed based on patterns of past weather. Long-term forecasts work in a similar way. Scientists can look at patterns in weather over a number of years to forecast further into the future. Students will be introduced to the vocabulary term climate. Students should recognize that climate is the long-term trend in weather data patterns. We cannot say with 100% certainty that it will be cold on January 30th, 2020 in St. Louis. However, we can predict it will be cold because we have years of data that support this prediction. Students will then obtain information from an article and a video to develop explanations about the difference between weather and climate. In the Elaborate portion of this lesson, students will attempt to describe the climate for a city in Missouri. Students will work in groups or pairs. Each group or pair will be assigned 1 or 2 months of weather data to analyze. They will access this data from the U.S. Climate Data website. Students will describe what the weather is usually like during the assigned time frame in their student journal. They will then be placed in order according to their months, and they will discuss their ideas. Students should recognize that climate is a pattern that will repeat with some variation year after year, and it allows us to make predictions about weather. In the Evaluate portion of this lesson, students will complete a formative assessment. Students will explain the difference between how we predict tomorrow's weather and how we predict what the weather will be like over the long term. By the end of this lesson, students will have explained the differences between daily weather and long-term climate.